Does anyone have anything else on chapter 9 they want to say before we move on to chapter 10?
Not me.
No, I feel like we've worked over that territory pretty good.
Pretty mined as much as we could out of it, probably.
So chapter 10 is where we finally get reintroduced to the Chums of Chance, who have kind of disappeared from the narrative over the past, I don't even know, 70 pages, 60 pages or so. And this is where sort of the second adventure that we are experiencing in real time starts, or sort of the new book is starting to point more towards what these moments in the book kind of represent. And at this point, we are informed that they have had a new Tesla device installed on their ship that is referred to as a newfangled radio. They are finding themselves picking up strange receptions or recordings, potential voices that they can't really make heads or tails of. Do you guys have any thoughts on the Tesla device that they have installed on their ship here at the beginning of chapter 10?
I think what's important to remember is that this is a new technology that they're completely unfamiliar with, and like we talked about with the previous chapter and Tesla's real life encounter with the signals that he thought were from Mars, but were likely coming from Marconi's own experimentation over in Italy. It's likely that they're just picking up something similar, whether it's Marconi and his work or Tesla's work, or just the random radio waves that exist out in space, from various sources. It's very likely that that's all they're getting, and they have no idea what it would be in the first place. So it's introducing this new technology to people who have no experience with it. So it's going to naturally feel like there's some kind of magic or witchcraft going on that they can't explain. At the same time, though, if we buy into the sort of magical realism that exists around the Chums and in their own little bubble of a world that exists within the novel itself, then yeah, maybe these are coming from either somewhere extraterrestrial or celestial, or they're coming from, as we see later, where they end up going inside the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So I think any of those are really fair game as far as interpretation of it. I tend to, when I read this, I tend to lean more towards the magical realism of it, with a kind of grounding of there is a real world explanation for it, but it's kind of more fun to lean into the fantasy of it and allow that to be the realism.
Yeah. Aside from the link to the research you pulled out about Tesla finding, radio signals. Aside from that, I think the only thing I would add is that the fellow aeronautical group, whose names I cannot remember, from the very beginning of the book, they report hearing voices, and I wonder if there isn't something meta-narratively, or I guess narratively, but these Chums of Chance things, these sections really drive a wedge between the idea of a distinction between narrative and meta-narrative. But whatever you want to classify it as, but some kind of like dynamic being illustrated about there being a receptivity to signals without technology that is treated as the only access point to those means of information or knowledge collection, I guess.
Yeah, the mention of the choir that you brought up, that comes into play even more directly later in the chapter. When they get closer to the portal that they go into, there's more of a direct reference to that chorus voice thing that the other group heard about.
That's a good point too, and I the reason why I wanted to ask about it was certainly because of the fact that I wasn't able to make sort of heads or tails of it, but that I there was enough detail there between that and the earlier in the first couple chapters that it seemed to be particularly important. And yeah, I would say that it would make the most sense to me anyway that it has something to do with the voices from like the Hollow Earth, or something from the interior side of the Earth. Because certainly, like when they do go inside the Earth, as we'll talk about fairly shortly, they directly start picking up transmissions from people on the inside of the Earth, like calling for aid too. So it could certainly be something like that.
To back up just a little bit, which is we're pretty early in the chapter to be doing that. What's with the boy with the face of an angel? Like that bit in this opening of this chapter is truly baffling to me. Like the Pynchon wiki says that like this figure appears, but I don't really it strikes me as kind of a non sequitur, I guess.
Well, okay, so you're talking about in the second sentence, a boy with the face of an angel.
Yes, that is it. Like the context, I guess, is very cloudy at the opening of this section
Yeah,
because
that's
it
true.
says the call had come just a week before in the midwatch, and midwatch is nighttime, and as far as we're aware, they tend to descend during the night to make camp, and as we find out later, they no longer need to like refuel the hydrogen envelope, so maybe they don't need to be descending every night anymore. But if so, then where is this haunting little demon appearing from?
My understanding is that it is how headquarters is contacting them.
That's kind of my thinking too.
Yeah, because what it does is like it says a boy with the face of an angel and an old painting under a baggy cap with its bill turned sideways had appeared with a telephone set whose cord trailed out the door into a scarily lit darkness. Could have been someone up too late playing a practical joke. Opinion next morning over watery oatmeal and fatback and the dregs of the previous day's coffee was in fact divided. So this thing appeared. They had a conversation about how it appeared, or what it is the next morning. But then, like the very next sentence starts to lay out the fact that they've received their new order, where it says their only instructions were to steer southwest and await course correction from a station unnamed. And then prior to that sentence, all it says is that there was no navigational charts to help them find the way. So, like in the way that in the very end of their first adventure in the beginning of the book, it says that like they don't ever see like a representative from headquarters show up. They don't ever know how the instructions show up. They just do. I interpreted that as like for some reason this strange painting with a telephone attached to it is the message from headquarters on what they're supposed to do next, and that like I don't know, maybe the telephone or a message from the radio is how Professor Vanderjuice ended up getting the instructions or whatever. But that's my interpretation of it, is that it's their newest communication from headquarters.
Let me put this to you: could it be Hermes, the messenger god, bringing a message? If we look at Jungian psychology, Jung saw Hermes as a messenger between realms and a guide to the underworld, the god of the unconscious. A little bit of a stretch, but he's delivering a message which directs them straight into the center of the earth, essentially, which could be in a way the underworld. He's depicted often as wearing a hat of some sort. I'm on the Wikipedia page right now, and there's a lot of floppy hats. That I don't know. I haven't had time to really play with this concept, but maybe there's something there.
Well, so I think you might have hit as far as where I'm coming at it from. That feels like that might more or less explain it, especially with the specific name dropping of like Chthonica, which is just a Greek underworld name. I think that makes sense. But the question is, previously we have been told that they basically receive the orders, period. That they just get them. So what has changed for the Chums of Chance that now there is, in a figurative sense, a newsboy, in a symbolic sense, like Hermes?
Yeah. Technology.
What has changed?
They have new technology that enables them to receive messages in a different way.
True.
But then why not use the Tesla device? I guess
maybe. Well, that's the Tesla device, which had remained silent since the day it was installed, though kept ever electrified and flawlessly calibrated. Maybe HQ just hasn't figured out a way to make it work properly, or to properly direct the signal that they need to direct, and this is kind of their intermediary means of, or maybe they are. I mean, HQ would probably be up enough on the technology that they could fear some kind of interference or interception of their message by another. I can't remember the name of the other group, but maybe they're afraid of them intercepting it, or someone working against the Chums intercepting it. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. The thing is that, again, from my particular reading of the Chums as provisional characters, as narrative devices in the most literal possible sense, the boy with the face of an angel can be purely symbolic, but he is framed as recognized by the Chums of Chance as like a prankster. and he's bringing the telephone. Why doesn't he just bring the message? Why does the telephone have to be?
Because it's an adventure novel. They can't just do something. It has to be the most obtuse roundabout way possible of doing a thing.
Well, and Hermes is considered like a prankster as well. He is not, the trickster god a la a Loki, but he is typically depicted as having a sense of humor, or certainly playing around with the people that he comes in contact with.
Look, I want to try to separate the words from the letters from the page.
So it literally could be nothing more than just like, here's a whack ass painting of Hermes because you're getting a message from HQ with a dismembered telephone as a here is a message. This is how you get messages now. The telephone.
It's a message to say Bear Southwest and await another message from another method of communication.
If that's not an adventure novel, I have never read an adventure novel.
No, it makes sense. It's just again, it's the contrast from the fact that earlier it was still framed as though they are getting these messages from some kind of eminent being.
Right.
It's just now to personify and then further materialize that abstraction into the telephone. It's a weird thing that's doing numbers with my trying to figure out this book.
That's fair. Now that you brought up that quote, there is part of me that's like, why didn't I find that weird when I why didn't I take a note of that when I read it the first time? Because it is just sort of strange.
It's enchanting.
And I didn't clock it either. I just kind of accepted it and moved on. But this has been a fascinating look into it. I'm glad you brought it up.
Well, and I like the whole paragraph is kind of like that because of the fact that opinion next morning over watery oatmeal and fatback and the dregs of the previous day's coffee was in fact divided. Obviously, as we find later, Miles is losing his ability to consistently follow a recipe or at least cook, period.
And one of them is losing their ability to speak.
That's Miles. Miles is the one losing the ability to speak.
Yeah, that's true. Yep, you're right.
I guess it doesn't need to be explained, but it's just weird that they're making watery oatmeal, which means it has to be freshly made. And fatback bacon, if you don't cook it fresh, is kind of awful, and they don't have refrigeration. I guess they are maybe at altitude. I don't know. They're either on the ground or in the air, and if they're on the ground, then the fatback has to be fresh, and if they're in the air, it doesn't have to be fresh. But the oatmeal has to be fresh, or else it won't be watery. In which case, that Miles is able to cook oatmeal and bacon. Why the hell are they drinking the dregs of yesterday's coffee? Are they out of coffee?
I have a theory about Miles's speech issue, and I think I can tie it to this whole cherubic messenger thing. Mm-hmm. When we get there, I'll have a little more time to kind of sit on it and mull it over in my head. But I had a previously existing idea about Miles, and I think I could tie it back to the whole thing.
Well, I'm just going to hold my breath until we get there then.
Yeah. My guess with the drinking the dregs of yesterday's coffee, the reason that what I squared away in my head for that is they just don't waste anything. They ended up making extra coffee the previous day that didn't get drank, so they're drinking it today because you have limited provisions on an airship, and so you're not gonna just dump some coffee over the edge when you could drink it the next day, even though that would suck. That was my thought process with that.
Mm-hmm. That tracks. I do find it funny to describe that as dregs because I do think of
usually
as the last sip.
Yeah, it's you got a bunch of coffee bugs that had one sip and probably grounds in it left because they're probably making coffee in a sock at this time in history. That's what a lovely breakfast: watery oatmeal, some bad bacon, and just the final sips of sock coffee.
Day old sock coffee.
A little bit further down that first page, there's a wonderful quote here that I wanted to get your all's take on as well. Does anyone want to read the paragraph starting with "They were born scant dozens of feet" to the end of that paragraph?
They were born scant dozens of feet above a high and hostile sea, scattered with islands of bare rock, unpopulated without vegetation. At one time, related Miles Blundell, in the days of the first explorers, each one of these islands, no matter how small, was given its own name. So amazing was their abundance in the sea, so grateful to God were their discoverers for any sort of landfall. But nowadays, the names are being lost. The sea is lapsing back into anonymity, each island rising from only another dark desert, as no longer named. One by one, the islets vanished from the nautical charts, and one day from the lighted world as well to rejoin the invisible.
So yeah, I wanted to get your guys' reaction to that particular quote because beyond the fact that it is well written, and Pynchon is kind of doing something that he I think talked a little bit about in Mason and Dixon, this concept of like naming something or committing something to a map or through definition, like literally brings it into existence and thereby wiping it out. You are wiping out its existence as well. I just wanted to see if you guys had any further thoughts on that concept, as especially as it relates to a chapter in which they are going in and out of something that to Pynchon seems to represent the idea of as you move forward in history or modernity and as you classify things and continue to assert more dominance over nature, those entrances to the hollow earth and kind of the magical realm they symbolize get smaller. So to start the chapter with something like that feels important to me, but I wanted to see if you guys had any thoughts on it.
I completely agree with you. And that was something I was going to bring up when we got towards the end of the chapter, when they go into that portal, and that it's smaller when they go in, and then even smaller when they go back out. Like you said, as science and technology have advanced, the sort of mysticism of the world, the magic of the world diminishes as a result of that. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because we learn about the way the world works, the way the universe works when we have these scientific advancements. But at the same time, there is a sort of loss of innocence, of magic in the world that gets taken away as a result of that. And that's not always a bad thing, because at least we can move forward and ensure the survival of our species a little bit better if we don't get in our own stupid ass way. If it weren't for those advancements, we would still think we're living on a flat earth, and that the sun revolved around the earth, and that we were the center of the universe. There's a lot of it where I'm like, yeah, it's good we got past that point, but then there's a lot of it where it's kind of, slow down and let's have that magic still. Yeah, I think that's a common thing throughout most of his work, and we've talked about it a lot in Mason and Dixon, that once people start assigning ownership or a sense of entitlement to nature, it destroys the sort of inherent value that it already had, and we can't ever get that back. And I think
Mhm.
what we start to see, especially later in the chapter, is that, and we've seen it a few times earlier in the book as well, is that nature will eventually kind of start to push back and make itself known, and try to kind of stop that progress as much as it can, albeit unsuccessfully most of the time, unfortunately. But it's certainly making an effort.
I don't know. I feel like I get it, but I don't know how to quite phrase it. So let me just throw ideas out. First of all, the way I look at the invisible as a device in this book is on a material level, literal, and on in that same material sense, you have the map being a map, or even the mental representation of the sea as more or less a material representation, but a symbolic representation of the real island. And at odds with that idea of the material visible and the material invisible, you have this moral and like spiritual idea of the enlightenment and of the light of God, or the light of understanding being bestowed upon these things. And I think that there's a very meaningful distinction between that moral light, that intellectual or spiritual light, and the material phrased light, I guess. Whether it's, again, literal light as photons and vision, or like the idea of mapping something and having the idea of the map as light. And so in that context of it being talked about as the first explorers naming these islands, what you have is these explorers who are, many of them obviously were, on commission to map the world, because the idea that you name the island, you plant your flag, you own it as a kingdom, right? So they were sent as a
Mhm.
commission, especially with these small little like juts of rock out of the sea. There's no value in that, and even like the ones that ended up having value, it was essentially accidental from the perspective of like the states that claimed ownership of them previously. I can't remember the island in particular, but there's one that I guess relatively close to Hawaii, that full of bat guano. and has been the major source of phosphorus for many industrial purposes ever since. That kind of thing where it's like, okay, we own this, and we own it because we said we owned it 200 years ago, even though we didn't know about the value on it.
Yeah.
But there were also plenty of merchant ships and explorers who were on commission to go do a specific thing, who happened to come across these islands, and because of their charter, they planted the figurative flag and gave it a name. That was never meant to be anything more than the value of finding it and giving it a name. And so there's that intrinsic value from the perspective of the people bestowing the name upon it, the explorers themselves, who are the kinds of people who choose to go and explore the Pacific Ocean and to choose to go and bestow a name upon a random jut of rock from the ocean.
Mhm.
And so with Miles phrasing it that specific way, as these things being discovered by these explorers, essentially meaninglessly, but given the names, given that significance, you have this idea of the information theory meaning of entropy, once again, where you can name things as much as you want, but there are so many more things in the world than there can be sensible names. And so there's ultimately clutter. And ultimately, those rocks' names don't matter. So, like, personally, when I read through this book the first time, and even when I read through the first half again before starting or this season of the show, I read Amsterdam Island and I was like, this feels like some Pynchon bullshit to name an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean, Amsterdam Island. And no, it's a real place. These
Yeah.
are real names, real things, and it's just a fascinating thing because, like, okay, Amsterdam was kind of the name of at the time like 3 different places across the world that had such different meanings. And in the case of like merchants trying to evade pirates, there's some value in having your messages, your letters be obscured in that same way. And so that drive of exploration provides the utility which justifies the bestowal of the name, but because of the fact that those islands didn't end up having value past the moment that they were used to dock and, stretch your legs, I guess, for a little bit, they lost their names because we lost the sense of exploration, which justified giving them and holding the names to the places.
Mhm. That's also a really great interpretation of that, particularly that sort of loss of exploration, almost for the sake of exploration, I guess. I mean, certainly there is the development of like slave trade as a result of exploration, resource extraction, or all the rest. But there was a time in which explorers were just interested in seeing what was on the other side of a body of water.
Yeah, and that's kind of like, again, to go back to the theme that has continually come up in this book so far, is commodification at odds with the kind of intrinsic value of humanity. Like that time where someone just wanted to see what was on the other side of the bay, that was all of human history up until basically the point this book is set at. And so much of this book's conversation with the ideas of frontier has to be held with that conflict in mind, where the idea that we have this modern idea of, I guess the space race is like a strange attempt to reclaim that value,
Mhm.
but it really isn't, because it was, a self-interested kind of distraction from mutually assured destruction on both parts of the Soviet Union and the United States, and an attempt to one up one another in a material and symbolic sense. I don't like it. It's this weird thing about this book that it's trying to drive at this. It's almost like the opposite of a distinction without a difference. It's a difference without any meaningful distinction that I'm not even
Mm.
sure could be distinguished. Because it's not like people no longer, it's not like people walking on the beach don't look down and say, "What's that rock over there?" and walk to the
Right.
rock.
Yeah.
People still have that instinct. That's still there.
Hmm.
And the people who chose to be explorers were the kinds of people who were more likely to do that.
That's
But
true.
it is
Yeah.
that sense of finality that removes it of its purpose, that gives it economic value, right?
Right. Or even just the concept of specifically your example of like, someone walking along a beach and like seeing a rock out off the water and being like, what is that? The one thing that is different is that there's probably not a lot of people doing that who are going to mentally classify that rock as something different from the ground they're walking on, right? Like they're probably more likely to say, "Oh, that is an extension of this of this beach or the state this beach is in or whatever. And it's that act of like cutting off a piece of land or formation of land as being a separate entity from that which surrounds it, which reminds me of the stuff in Mason and Dixon with drawing the lines and how as soon as like they draw a line across this property, someone is suddenly aware that there is other property that is not his, because until then he had no reason to think about it. And then if you're going down a commodification route, the idea of distinctly saying this is this island and this is this island is something about bringing those things into existence in a commodified way because you are drawing distinctions between them. And that means that they can be treated in different ways or used for different things through sort of a claimant. When in a natural way, if you were a native person or someone who didn't have like the concept of boundary lines or civilization, you would probably just say, oh, there's more of this one thing. And that isn't necessarily distinct from where I am right now with all of the sort of implications that can come with making that distinction. I don't know. That was the first thing that came into my head as a result of what you just said.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think it's meaningless. It's one of those weird times where you really start to see, you start to convince yourself that Pynchon is like a secret Buddhist or something, despite almost never talking about Buddhism. Like he talks about
Yeah,
pretty
I
much
get.
every other religion, but Buddhist thought is not in the text almost ever.
Yeah, you're right about that.
True.
From that quote, as long as we don't have anything else to add, the Chums kind of continue on their sort of aimless, at least to them, journey in a general direction until finally they come across a very interesting island with some very interesting folks on it who seem to live in a, by all accounts, normal city. There's shops, there's houses, there's streets. They're all dressed very nicely, but they don't wear shoes. And interestingly, they have, quote, in the center of town, some huge underground construction venture was in progress. Citizens stood on overpasses and catwalks gazing down into concrete pits full of steam machinery, draft animals, and debris. When asked its purpose, they frowned, puzzled as if they had not quite heard the visitors. Home, some said. It's home. What is home where you come from? But wandered away before any of the lads could answer. I wanted to get your all's thoughts on this because they just sort of leave from there and we don't get a return to these random people at any point. And as far as what we know to this degree in the book anyway, or to this point in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this random interaction, especially with what comes afterwards, speaks of how the Hollow Earth dweller in Mason and Dixon is passably like everyone else, but he's just a little weirder. Like he's just a little bit strange, but that can be passed off as difference due to, you know, like, well, he's from a foreign country, in the same way that these people seem to be doing a pretty good imitation of a normal, as we would call it, like modern society at the time, except they don't understand the purpose of wearing shoes, apparently. And that despite seeming to have a fairly standard looking city with structures and houses and shops and commerce above ground, they are digging into the ground and calling that home, and that is where they are going, that they're going home despite the kind of milieu of society they live in. To me, the theory that I have about this section is that these are either Hollow Earth dwellers or the descendants of Hollow Earth dwellers that came out of the portal and settled somewhere on the planet Earth. And that in the case of the latter situation, which I think would make more sense for this crazy conspiracy corner theory, that as descendants of the original generation that left the portal, they know enough about their history and tradition from those that came before them to know that their true home is in the ground, it's on the inside of the planet, and that they don't know how to get back there or have forgotten how to get back there because perhaps they see the direction that the world is headed or that society is headed, and so they realize that their chances to kind of return home either are closing, or that where they came from seems more attractive to them now based upon the stories they grew up hearing than the world that they're actually finding themselves living in, with the kind of the sort of Damocles of capitalism hanging over everything that we've talked about, and that they're trying to return home. And the only way they know how to try that is through utilizing modern machinery and equipment and just digging straight down instead of going to one of these portals where they could get inside in the way that is most natural. And that because of the fact that they are utilizing, if we're again talking about the Hollow Earth as kind of the magical realm that is against the day, I suppose is what I'll say, that because they're using those tools, they're never going to be successful. They're just going to keep digging because you cannot utilize these modern pieces of equipment or machinery to return to a time in which those did not exist, so to speak. That's anyway the like crazy, I guess, conspiracy corner for this episode from my perspective of what this sort of random interaction represents. What do you guys think?
I'm with you pretty much all the way on that. I think I took away from this what my mind went to was the hidden people from Icelandic and Faroese folktale. They're referred to as Huldufolk. I had a very, very kind of scant knowledge of them going into this, but decided to kind of look more into it so we could talk about it.
Sure.
So essentially, they are supernatural beings that live in nature. They look and behave similar to humans, but they live in a parallel world, which we could use the Hollow Earth as that sort of parallel. Like they're so of nature that they're from within the earth, and the fact that they're out and trying to get back in kind of points to the idea that they've been displaced in some way, whether it was because of them being the sort of genealogical descendants of earlier hidden people who came to the surface and found dwellings there, or if they were just displaced by other means, or if the scientific advancements of the world that are going on are drawing them out in a sort of curiosity or a protective measures. And that I think is certainly debatable, but part of their abilities is that they are able to make themselves visible and invisible at will. And I found through the Wikipedia article on them, there's an article that I was reading called Spirits of the Land, A Tool for Social Education by Olena Thorvardóttir. I'll link that in the show notes. And there's a couple of quotes I pulled from there that I thought were kind of interesting, that if you think about it in context to them, these people that they're interacting with being these hidden people, kind of makes it an interesting interaction that they have with them. So firstly, she says that oral tales concerning Icelandic elves and trolls no doubt served as warning fables. They prevented many children from wandering away from human habitations, taught Iceland's topographical history, and instilled fear and respect for the harsh powers of nature. And then later in the article, she says, quote, "The messages are delivered through many devices, but mainly through the spirits of the land, elves and trolls, which emerge from their hills and rocks. The fate of humans depends on how they interact with these spirits. We are not speaking here of pretty fairies with magic wands, but rather huldufolk, hidden people, who wear regular Icelandic clothing using the power of their words as weapons. They cast spells upon people, blessing or cursing them according to how they judge their behavior." So keeping that kind of idea in mind, and then what happens when they go into the Hollow Earth at the end of this chapter, I kind of like playing with this idea that these are sort of spiritual or supernatural protectors of the earth that are out in the surface world for whatever reason, and have decided to sort of interact with the chums, sort of getting to feel out what they're about and determine how they're going to go about it, and seeing that they're relatively harmless, or deciding that they're relatively harmless, just kind of decide to pull back and go on their own way until they actually interact with them, later at the end of the chapter. So that's just my little conspiracy corner contribution to all of this, but it's definitely a really interesting section of the book.
I'm gonna do the thing which I'm sure some of our listeners find annoying. I think what y'all are saying makes a lot of sense, and I think that these ideas and the reasons that you have them are probably to some extent intentional. I have a slightly more rooted gloss of this section.
Okay.
First of all, it's mentioned in the previous page before the long paragraph about the islands getting names. They were heading all but exactly to the islands of Amsterdam and
St. Paul.
St. Paul, yeah.
Yep.
And the one person who they could get to justify why is this modern city operating on this rock in the middle of nowhere. But the one answer they could get is that they survived this shipwreck of HMS Megara, I think.
Yeah,
Gaira.
that's it's a good a pronunciation as I think any of us are going to come up with.
Well, I took classes in this that form of Greek, and I can't quite get it. Megaira was the Fury, the Eumenides, one of the Eumenides, who, like the others, was either born of the blood from the same event of castration which led to the birth of Aphrodite, or, according to other sources, the daughter, Megara at least, is the particular daughter of Nyx and Acheron. And Nyx would be the goddess Titan. It's when you're talking about those basic gods of ancient Greek mythology, it's really the distinction's very difficult to grasp. And Acheron is a specific river, but is viewed as one of the many entryways into the underworld. And Megara is known as the Jealous One. And so what we have is this British ship that has found itself in the middle of nowhere in a sea of islands that have forgotten their names. And their only flag is this ship, which literally means the jealous one. And to me, I have a hard time not seeing that as like kind of a recapitulation of colonialism in and of itself.
Mhm.
And so the previous exposition by Miles talking about the loss of these names, lining up with this person, the only person who remembers the origin at all, says that they shipwrecked on Amsterdam Island, and it was a miserable place, and they got rescued, but they can't remember how they got rescued, or at least they don't say how they got rescued. And the worst part was the absence of motion. And so, on some level, the digging is a motion they have access to because they don't have technology that allows them to fly. And maybe if they dig enough, they can get there. But they apparently have given up on leaving the island, whether it's the exact same island as Amsterdam, or it's another island nearby that for some reason they were rescued onto. But to me, it reads as they were rescued by the determination to decide that they had been rescued, and so they decided to recreate their home being a British ship. It looks a lot like a British town or a city.
Yeah.
And so, in the material gloss of what's happening here, what I would describe it as, these people lost their minds being in this on these shipwrecked on these islands where they don't know where they are and they don't have a way off of it, and they just decided one day to keep digging in the same way that people will just do that. And if you don't understand that, I recommend you
The
go
way
to a
people
beach
get addicted
someday.
to tunneling, you're talking about?
Well, not those people in particular, but just like go to a beach. Someone's going to be digging a hole.
Oh, that's true.
That's definitely true. It's like a weird human compulsion that just seems to overtake people.
It's not everyone. It's certainly not all the time. But
Right,
some
but there's
people
always
certainly like to
somebody.
dig. Yeah.
Just needs to dig.
Yeah, and there are countless stories if you go on the worst parts of the internet, which I might argue are some of the best parts in the modern face of the internet.
Sure.
If you go to the places where people do a lot of stimulants, they just dig holes. They
That
just
seems
be
like a
digging.
more of a reaction to what they're doing than some kind of innate need to dig.
No, absolutely.
From there, they have the conversation with the survivor of that shipwreck that Will so perfectly elucidated for us. We learn by way of Chick speaking as maybe a slightly older, slightly more mature individual, where he's curious. That's about what I estimate the population of Saint Mask to be. Once again, tying together that the population of it is likely just the shipwreck's population, and they've all gone crazy. After that, the ship leaves and begins to head towards a volcano, which is going to end up being their destination. It is their destination because it is the exact point on Earth that is antipodal. I'm not exactly
Podal,
sure how
yeah.
that podal, yeah, to Colorado Springs, where Dr. Tesla is currently experimenting. So this is happening at the same time as those experiments in Chapter 9 that we talked about. the Chums of Chance logistical services. I would really just love to know who's running that. Who's in charge of the mailroom for the Chums of Chance to ship these packages out?
It's nobody. Like it's just a madhouse where anything goes.
Yeah, just a bunch of children running around sending out crates
Basically.
with random machinery in it. They deliver uninvoiced by Oriental laborers who trooped in and out of the encampment shift after shift beneath often quite staggering burden. Pallets and nails from open crates soon littered the area. Thatch debris fallen bit by bit. Woolly hats drifted here and there ankle deep. Vermin brought ashore with the cargo, sometimes all the way from California, scrambled off and soon had found homes on the slopes of the volcano, venturing down to camp only on late night galley raids. Which is just it absolutely crazy setup for something of an array of electrical instrumentation that none of them know anything about. We don't get any sort of a description of like what it is, what it's used for, what it's reading. We just know that it's apparently very big and requires a crew of multiple laborers hours at a time to unload and potentially assemble. It's just absolutely lovely stuff. Then there's a line here, the blindness at the heart of the diamond for all they knew. The Pinch-On Wiki goes on a weird, like long tangent about this particular line, and I struggle to, especially after reading the entry on the Pinch-On Wiki about it, struggle to see how that line is important at all.
It seems like a bit of a reach.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask for sake of, I guess, completion, if there was anything you guys had about that or the machinery that seems important to this sort of last couple of paragraphs before the page break.
I didn't have anything about either of those. I other than the blindness at the heart of a diamond, I think is just a beautiful line. I don't think there's much to pull from there other than it's just great prose. The line of vermin brought ashore with the cargo and then just kind of scattering about, just immediately, I was like, Jesus Christ, that's going to evolve over time into God knows what, or cause untold ecological destruction. It's like the cane toad in Australia. You don't know what you're putting out there. And it could be totally benign. It could completely alter the landscape. There's no way of knowing. But that's just happened now. So give it a few thousand years and who knows what the hell's going to go on.
Chums of Chance once again representing nothing but positive vibes when they arrive.
Yeah.
They arrive, they set up some useless machinery, at least to the reader anyway, and carry with them an invasive species from a different place that is left there to do God knows what.
Again, lots of vibes, very few coherent sentences.
Uh-huh.
This one I think is smaller than the names of the islands.
Sure.
I guess my thought is that backing way up to why they're called the Chums of Chance and what the logistical services might be, to back up slightly less, I guess.
Sure, yeah.
They are the Chums of Chance, and their logistical service is never questioned and always on time. And we have to remember, we're in the middle of nowhere in the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, that's true.
This is not a place where even Oriental laborers could appear quickly on time, or really could navigate there reliably. Like, I'm sure they could figure it, people can navigate by stars, but this is the daytime. Getting there in particular gonna be pretty tricky as just essentially jobbers, but on a boat.
Mm-hmm.
The boys, the crew of the Chums of Chance that we know, are just kind of there at the volcano, having arrived there and having seen all of this stuff happen more or less by accident, as meaningful as an accident can possibly be, because they built something that is just leaving. Like it's kind of weird. And the blindness at the heart of a diamond, with all of that context, to me only reads as like a diamond is more or less, from an optical standpoint, more or less perfect. Like there's almost no distortion.
Right. Yep.
And so there is just pure light at the heart of the diamond. There's pure white on the beach. There's pure purity at the foot of this volcano, and there is nothing as a result of all of this scattered random chance that has occurred. And I don't know what to make of that, but it's there despite the fact that this entire work crew has appeared with the equipment and the materials to build something that they then just took away with them.
Yeah. And it's also weird, like, just to add another layer of the strangeness to it, right? If the Chums of Chance Logistical Services are good enough that they can send a crew of people down there to assemble something and then take it with them after observing whatever they're looking to observe, because as usual, the Chums of Chance, they're being used for something, and it's certainly something that probably supports capital or the powers that be or whatever. What do they need the Chums of Chance for this for? Right? Like, I'm talking about the actual, like, characters on the Inconvenience. Why do they need to be there? If the logistical services can come and assemble this and then leave it there for the time being and then take it away. Is it just to have someone minding the equipment? It's a very random kind of thing that happens in total.
I think there's two possible reasons that are kind of tied to each other. I think on the one hand, they're there because they have to be, because the story is about them and they have to go where the story
Fair,
tells them to
yeah.
go. I mean, in a meta narrative like this, that's why they're there. On the other hand, they're there, I think, in case something happens and they need to be a fall guy, or if they need to be a sort of defender of the equipment. I doubt that the people who are setting it up are equipped or trained in any sort of way to defend the technology. They're probably more just operational and construction minded.
Uh-huh.
So they wouldn't have a way, if somebody were to come and attack or try to steal their stuff, they wouldn't have the wherewithal to really defend that property. So you have to have this sort of boys adventurers group who are just basically meat shields and really nothing else in that situation. And they're there to take the fall either physically or metaphorically should the need arise.
I've got okay. What you saying that has kind of brought something into focus for me in the idea that perhaps as provisional as they are, as narrative devices as our crew are, and as inconvenient as they are, the Chums of Chance logistical service can be described as nothing but convenient, and they are
That's true.
they are antipodal to the experiments happening in Colorado Springs, and so they are here to provision us to witness that what Tesla is observing is this same phenomenon of these random Asian workers in the middle of nowhere in some causally incoherent way. They are here, they have the electrical devices so that they can justify to themselves as characters them being there as narrative devices for us to see that this activity is happening. And so it is the idea of the reciprocal circuit of the planet kind of taken to its ultimate interpretation where the it's literally reciprocal on the opposite side instead of having like lightning striking and stuff all around random points. You just have this random work being done for the sake of the narrative.
Huh. Yeah, that could be. Are you thinking that, like, labor is setting up the equipment and then turning on whatever the equipment is, and I guess this is extrapolating out from what you've already said. Like, would you be thinking that them doing that and turning this equipment on creates whatever thing in real life that Tesla picked up on his own radio system that he is convinced is aliens,
Well,
and that the Chums of Chance are, like, somewhat related to that?
no, I mean like in a much less literal sense, because the Tesla finding the alien voices is not something that has happened in the book, right?
That's true.
There's kind of the vague allusion to it by means of mentioning the Tesla device, and so this could be viewed as like this is the justification for Tesla's real life experience of
Mm.
hearing those messages. The other, I guess, fragment of thought that it kind of disrupts the ultimate provisionality of this entire scene, which feels hollow, Like it feels like even Pynchon would be like, "That's a little bit much. We don't need that. That's
Yeah.
not helping anything." Is that it is phrased as, "And only hours after leaving behind these dechristened fragments in the sea's reasserted emptiness, they had raised the volcano." Because what are the Chums of like? Why wouldn't the Chums of Chance have the equipment necessary? And if the Chums of Chance logistical service can bring all of these workers who are, at least theoretically, in the context of this scene, real people who have just happened to row out in the middle of nowhere by demand of some shadowy force, why are they doing that and then just taking it all away, hours later? When instead, like the whole scene is bookmarked or bookended, not bookended with raising the volcano and then leaving the boys to gather closely beneath the methodically seeping volcano. And so, in some sense, Tesla doing these experiments has built this volcano on the opposite side of the Earth, and the Chums of Chance being there to observe the effects of his experiments on the opposite side of the globe has provided the justification for the material volcano appearing.
Yeah, that's as good a theory as I think any I could come up with would be for what is going on here, or what the purpose of this whole thing is. Certain.
Mhm.
This is of course the mandatory point in the show in which I say, if you have any ideas, listener, please email us, and we will go over them on the show when we receive your correspondence, because it is a interesting one, and it's the element of his work that makes discussing it hard at times is that no one person will typically know all of the answers to these questions, or what the inclusions is, other than the man himself, who does not.
I said the last thought last time. This is for real the last one. The antipode of South Africa. What is that? Because they are there at this random island in the middle of nowhere
Right.
to witness something on the opposite side of Colorado Springs. So where's the logistical service taking those devices? Seems like it might be relevant in terms of elucidating what's actually happening.
Well, that's true. It does say that they're taking him somewhere else in the hemisphere, South Africa, most likely. I don't know what would be antipodal to that.
It looks like it's north of Hawaii. I don't know what to make of that. There's very little north of Hawaii.
Yeah, could be a map that lost its name, or it could be an island that lost its name. You've given me a lot to think about over the next couple of weeks, Will.
I live to confuse.
From here, we learn that at some point in Chicago, they collided with a building, which we're not sure exactly what damage that may have caused to the building itself, but we do know that it did destroy the bust of William McKinley that they had previously been using as a figurehead for the ship, which that on its own is pretty funny, because if you look at pictures of William McKinley, he isn't the most majestic looking individual to create a likeness of for the front of your airship. But of course, they are intensely patriotic, so it makes perfect sense that they would be using the current president as their figurehead. And there's a lot of disagreements over what should replace the figurehead on the ship.
Mhm.
Chick Counterfly and Darby Suckling had been lobbying for a naked woman. The more curvaceous, the better, as Darby demanded at each of their frequent ad hoc gatherings on the subject, bringing to the lips of Lindsay Noseworth a reproof by now all but reflexive. Suckling. Your list of demerits grows at a dishearteningly vertiginous rate. And not one of them ain't just dang shipboard politics, expostulated Darby, with a red-faced scowl since his voice had changed. A charmingly insubordinate tone, once Tolliver had darkened to something more considered, and to that degree disquieting. Randolph St. Cosmo suggests that they should choose the national bird as a safe and patriotic choice. Miles Blundell has no opinion on this, as long as there is something for him to eat. And Lindsay, as if offended by the worldliness of these choices, argued as always for pure abstraction. One of the Platonic polyhedra, perhaps. What do we make of their difficulty in choosing a figurehead, or their arguing back and forth about it?
I just think it's fun. It's a fun
It's very fun.
little break from everything that's gone on in the previous pages, and lightens the tone a little bit before the end of the chapter.
Mhm.
And it does a good job of highlighting their own individual personalities. I mean, as surface level as they may be, because that's what they are. It's, you've got the horny boy going through puberty in Darby. You've got the quote unquote leader, de facto leader in Randolph that wants to keep everything above board and patriotic and safe.
Yep.
Lindsay, who just wants something to eat, and or no, sorry, Miles, who wants something to eat. Lindsay, who wants the abstract platonic polyhedral. It's great. It's
the weird hipster teenager of the group of them.
I mean, we have to remember these are just teenagers, and they're just like variations on a theme, really.
Yeah.
And it's a wonderful little, I hesitate to call it debate between them, but it's a fun, I like their dynamic in these kind of situations.
Yeah, especially in the fact that it does come to blows to the point that they need to put a sign up that says no ass grabbing activities in the chow line will be tolerated.
Yeah, my take is a little bit less fun. I don't disagree. It's still a very fun scene, but like trying to again read into it, it feels quite sinister, as most of the Chums of Chance activities seem to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, so first of all, before I get to my sinister conclusion, I would like to criticize, as always, the Pynchon Wiki that does say that they settled on, and this is getting ahead of us right now. It says they settled on the matronly form. Where is that page exactly?
By the time Inconvenience was ready to take once more to the sky, the figurehead dispute had been resolved amicably. The boys had compromised on a draped female personage, perhaps more maternal than erotic. Apologies were exchanged, reiterated, eventually at tiresome length. New apologies for these reiterations then became necessary, and the working days became saturated in sky punctilio.
Okay, well, thank you for finding that.
Yeah, 112.
Yeah, so the Pynchon Wiki says, it's hard to see how the final figurehead choice is a compromise among the candidates of President McKinley, a naked woman, national bird, something to eat, one of the platonic polyhedra draped, ultimately deciding on a draped matronly female personage. And I would just like to explain this bugbear of mine. Compromise does not mean the literal mean of things. You don't choose the exact middle point when you're taking a compromise. A compromise is everyone being unhappy, not everyone's decision being equally theoretically compromised. In terms of why it's a compromise, you have Darby and Chick being, like hormonal. You have Randolph being safe and patriotic. Miles doesn't care really at all, other than that it should be, in the direction of food. And Lindsay really wants principles, which is not a meaningful thing in the context of a figurehead, because a figurehead is purely symbolic. And so when you get to that, what this summarizes into is you have a woman, a symbol of nation and purity. And so you kind of just get this distillation of like fascist symbolism of the mother as pure and the only good outcome, which is ironic given the misogyny inherent in fascism, but turns out fascists aren't very logical. And that's just to me that's how I read all of this, is you see these various conflicts because these kids are kids and because they just have to decide on something. And I see that as kind of a foreshadowing as a result, because you have Darby, who has become sinister, more considered and disquieting, where he was cheery and rambunctious and happy to flaunt authority earlier. Now that he's old enough to actually argue, it scares Lindsay rather than just making him annoyed and giving him an excuse to blow off some steam, which McKinley was killed by anarchists.
That's true.
And Darby is clearly, tending in that direction symbolically.
Yeah, I mean, on the very next page from the kind of introduction of this whole dispute, he does mention the Haymarket bomb as a pivotal turning point in American history.
Yep, and that's really all the thoughts I have on the figurehead dispute overall.
No, that's great stuff.
I do like the scene leading up to it, and I do, There's plenty of meat in the middle that isn't actually about the figurehead to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to cut to the chase there.
No, I appreciate you doing so. There is part of me that wants to create a sign and hang it in my kitchen that does say fundament seizing activities in the chow line will not be tolerated. Violations will draw 10 weeks extra duty each by order of the executive officer. P.S. Yes, that's weeks. The liberal usage of exclamation points really does speak to how young all of these people are.
Yeah.
It reminds me of those early 20th century like no shirt, no shoes, no service signs that like
Mhm.
we have the idiom of the no shirt, no shoes, no service thing because it's kind of a distillation of them all. But like if you go back and look at pictures of them from like the 20s, the list is really long and really stupid.
It's like the size of a door.
And it's not like even meaning it is like that idea of like you can't walk down the street backwards with an ice cream cone in your pocket, kind of like this
Mhm.
is clearly very pointed.
Yeah, it's a law made for one person who did that one time that the sheriff hated. I do also love the detail that immediately after the sign gets put up that while they are no longer taking each other to blows, they are throwing food at one another when
Mhm.
when the master in arms isn't looking. This is also where we get the first mention of the fact that Miles Blundell seems to be losing his ability to both speak and cook properly. The line here says, nonetheless, they went on shuffling and muttering, sneaking finger-sized globs out of the asparagus mousse. Gross. Creole-style gumbo or mashed turnips. Whenever they thought the master-at-arms wasn't looking, not actually to eat, but surreptitiously to flick at one another, hoping for a response. Miles Blundell, as ship's commissary, looked on in genial bewilderment. Zumblety bonk! He called encouragingly as the food flew. Vamble, vamble! And then this is where it talks about how he had begun to alarm his shipmates because he's having a hard time cooking. And this is another just. Do you want to pick up that next paragraph, someone, and read the description of his losing ability to cook? Because it's really funny the way Thomas Pynchon puts it.
Wandering the corridors of the spectral, Miles had begun increasingly to alarm his shipmates. Mealtimes too often were apt to revert to exercises in deep, even mortal uncertainty, depending where Miles had been that day to procure his ingredients. Sometimes his cooking was pure cordon bleu. Sometimes it was inedible, due to excursions of spirit. Polarity was never entirely predictable from one day to the next. Not that Miles would deliberately set out to wreck the soup or burn the meatloaves. He seldom got that overt, tending more to forgetful omissions or misreadings of quantity and timing. If anything's an irreversible process, cooking is, lectured thermodynamics officer Chick Counterflag, meaning to be helpful, although unavoidably in some agitation. You can't deroast a turkey or unmix a failed sauce. Time is intrinsic in every recipe, and one shrugs it off at one's peril.
Do we have any thoughts on Miles's weird inconsistencies in the kitchen and his occasional inability to speak?
The original note I had written in my copy of the book is it seems like Miles may be being affected by the Tesla device that's on board now, because this is a whole new thing that did not start until at least until the installation of that device.
Mhm.
So I think that kind of also ties to what the Pynchon Wiki mentions about some of the characters having this sort of interconnectedness through their odd behavior, unexplainable behavior, whether it's Lou with his whatever happened in the past situation, or Foley with his abilities to sort of predict and understand the stock market and do that before anyone else can. And now Miles with this bizarre behavior that seems to just kind of come and go. My thinking is that with all three of them, this is a result of the new expansion of radio waves and electrical usage being put out into the environment is somehow
Mhm.
interacting with their brains in different ways. Foley has a piece of metal lodged in his brain, and not insignificantly sized piece of metal lodged in his brain. So there is I have this idea that he could be getting these kind of like picking up the telegraph lines. Like he may be
Mhm.
picking up the signals from those, and that's how he's able to get that information so quickly, because all of this is traveling at the speed of light. And then Miles is interacting with this device that's on the ship that he may have at some point that we haven't been made aware of yet had an interaction with it and in the typical like adventure boy story, something he would have been meddling with it and gotten electrocuted or something like that, and it would awaken this ability in him. However, it's not really an ability as so much as it is an inability for him to speak and perform his cooking duties with any sort of regularity. So if we kind of go back to the beginning of the chapter when I mentioned I had this idea that I could tie back to the way that he was acting. The voices which arrived over the next few days were difficult to credit with any origin in the material sphere. All these radio signals that start coming in through the device that the device itself is clearly not working, this is where I was going to go with it, which is why they're having to send Hermes over to directly relay the message via whatever the weird telephone device he has now is, because they weren't getting what they were supposed to get to the radio, because for whatever reason, all that information is getting rerouted over into Miles's brain and scrambling his thoughts and his speech abilities. So that's my little crazy conspiracy corner thing with this whole thing and those three characters in particular.
I like it. Is Miles the same character to support this theory from the first appearance of the Chums at the beginning of the book, who talks about like receiving messages from beyond or being able to see things?
I think
like
so.
he sees the 3-card Monty like for what it is.
He is. I'm confident of that. If you want to check, you can. He's the generally disorganized one too.
Mm-hmm. I'm looking at this again. This is on page 23. Miles is the one who confidently said that all three cards were the same color, and that the 9 of diamonds, the Curse of Scotland, and was in the guy's hat.
Yeah, that's what I had meant. Like he's able to see through the game for what it is.
And then later he says, sometimes Miles, with a strangely apprehensive note in his voice, these peculiar feelings will surround me, Lindsay, like the electricity coming on, as if I could see everything just as clear as day. So yeah, I think there's something in his brain that is starting to react to all these newfound electrical signals that are kind of all over the place.
That makes sense.
I was coming at this section from a slightly different direction that I think lines up quite well with what you were saying there. Basically, the line excursions of spirit whose polarity was never entirely predictable, and the subsequent lecture from Chick Counterfly about you can't reverse cooking makes me wonder, first of all, okay, are some of these like garbled words that come out of Miles the kind of thing where if you could get exactly the form of speech that you like, the type of speech that Pynchon was imagining Miles to have, like just as his dialect, and then like recorded it and reversed it, if it would actually be coherent, or if it is supposed to be like in the imaginary number sense of like electricity, it is like this fourth dimensional movement that isn't quite spatially coherent. It's not simple time and it's not simple space. It is like a diagonal along space and time or something. Anyway, beside that idea of trying to figure out what accent Miles is supposed to have before you can even start to answer that question, what it reminded me a lot of is Slaughterhouse-Five, and the framing device of that book, for those who haven't read it, is that the main character, Billy Pilgrim, that's him, has, either due to post-traumatic stress disorder during World War II, where he experienced the Dresden fire bombings, or due to, at some point in time shortly after that, being abducted by aliens and being introduced to their fifth dimensional ways of being, he has stopped being located in time as a sentient personhood. And so his narrative of his life is something that is entirely disrooted from any reality, but it is all still linear in time. It's just, for him, time doesn't exist in a meaningful sense. And so, in conjunction with the idea of Miles being like having his mind and his like latent ESP of sorts that we saw at the beginning of the book being interfered with these electrical objects, could it be some sort of like, because of his pre-existing concentration or ability to concentrate on random signals in the universe, having these devices which do that kind of like supercharges his perception and therefore he simply is no longer capable of distinguishing those electromagnetic fields from the parts of electromagnetic reality that we interact with as material human. And in that same way, Tesla being crazy is kind of him being a person who has taken his natural predilection to understanding the world and made it incoherent just through sheer exposure to these kinds of like metaphysical signal, like or these real signal processing devices that interact with this kind of metaphysical sense of signaling that the book is entertaining as a real thing.
Hmm. Oh, remember when he thought about combining these chapters together into one episode?
I literally was just thinking, I don't think we're gonna make this into one episode. We're only a few pages into this chapter so far. This has been some of the best conversation that we've had. This has really been fun.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of fun, this section does close out with a great aside on the fact that the one who eats better than anyone on the ship is Pugnax.
Yeah.
The one dinner in the company who had never suffered disappointment, however, was Pugnax, whose fastidiousness of diet Miles, regardless of his moods, had always honored, along with a range of human preferences that included vintage champagnes, terrapin stew, and asparagus hollandaise. Pugnax insisted upon separate courses served in separate dishes, which must be of bone china of a certain age and authenticated origin, bringing new import to the expression "dog's dinner." that is one well treated dog.
Yep.
After the page break, we pick it up, and it is almost 4th of July once again, and there is a there is a standing order to have a celebration on the 4th of July. It's not something that they're allowed to choose not to do, which I think is just very funny. They get into a debate about fireworks is either a patriotic symbol of, quote, noteworthy episodes of military explosion in our nation's history, deemed necessary to maintain the integrity of the American homeland against threats presented from all sides by a benightedly hostile world, which is maybe the most bootlicking statement I think you could possibly come up with for the American military. And then Miles Blundell says that explosion without an objective is politics in its purest form, which is absolutely another fascinating take. All leading to Darby saying, actually, I think we should light up fireworks in commemoration of the Haymarket bomb, which is a real turning point in American history, to which Lindsay Noseworth chastises him as being blatantly anti-American, which he then accuses his mom of being a Pinkerton.
Oh man, I love these boys. They're so much fun.
It is really fun stuff, yeah. And at this point, they get into a conversation about who may have invented fireworks, and then the hour of the great experiment on the other side of the world approached. Smells not quite of mess cooking collected in the lee of the wrecked volcano, as if some lengthy chemical procedure had repeatedly failed to provide an unambiguous result. Electrodes sputtered and flared, and giant transformer coils droned afflictedly, almost in human accents, fed by electrical generators whose steam was being supplied by the local hot spring. Transmitting and receiving antennas for the wireless equipment had been run up the sides of the lava cone, and communication had commenced, while almost exactly on the other side of the Earth, Chums of Chance monitoring personnel waited in a weatherproof shack at the top of Pike's Peak, though beliefs varied as to the nature of the strange link. Was the signal going around the planet or through it? Or was linear progression not at all the point, with everything instead happening simultaneously at every part of the circuit? So there, we get slightly more information about what they're doing. They have connected a circuit between the 2 points on the globe, but whether it's going through the Earth or around it, they are unsure. And what the purpose of this is, also unsure. It's just another instance of the Chums doing something for some reason that serves something, but they're just sort of along for the ride. Did we have any thoughts on the revelation of what the experiment may be pointing toward that we haven't already talked about?
Yeah, I guess the only thing with regard to that I would say is that in terms of the specific line of Was the signal going around the planet or through it, or was linear progression not at all the point with everything? Anyone who's read Gravity's Rainbow, there's a lot of connections there, but also there's the fact that there's like a weird thing in this period of electrophysics understanding was that what we now call positive, what's like the positive side of a battery terminal and is still indicated with a plus, turns out is not right. That is not the direction of charge. If you spend time around electricians or electrical engineers, this is one of those things that they bring up at like cocktail parties as like a fun fact because it's just a fun weird thing that electricians, tradespeople use that colloquial use of positive and negative of the direction of electron or the direction of charge coming from the positive side and ending at the negative side. And electrical engineers almost always use the opposite orientation, and physicists will as well, because that is more accurate in terms of the stream of electrons flowing. And I think it's just an interesting way to get at that as like, there are crazy ideas about electrons, including like the single electron theory, that there is one electron that is just going around the entire universe and is constituting reality essentially, which is pretty much not like that. That one is not even like theoretically you could use the world as a reciprocating circuit and provide electricity everywhere, but then everyone would die. It's just like almost certainly not the case. That is not a coherent understanding of electrons and quantum mechanics. However, it's one of those things where like this idiom about causation that Pynchon uses throughout his books, and especially in his big books, this is kind of that intersection point with the cosmological world and the scientific understanding.
So moving forward in the book, we get to the resolution of the dispute over the figurehead, which we already kind of talked about prior, but not before Miles says what is probably his most indecipherable pronunciation of a term. He says, "Gloim Brugnitz Bidfusp" is my best shot at that one. And then we have a line here at the end. Was it any wonder that when the opportunity did arise, as it would shortly, the boys would grasp unreflectively a chance to transcend the secular, even at the cost of betraying their organization, their country, even humankind itself? I assume that that's just pretty standard foreshadowing for something coming up in the book. So I don't know if there's anything we really have to say about that specifically.
I do have actual expounding to go on with the secular thing.
Okay.
It's going to appear that it's not about the secular thing at first. Earlier it says, "Let us develop protocols," added Chick Counterfly, "to avoid its happening again," with regard to the violent outbursts that came out of the arguments over what the figurehead should be of. And I think looking back at the sign that Randolph was forced to put up
Mhm.
to request that everyone like take it seriously as though he isn't already the executive officer, as if him putting up a sign shouldn't be the end of it, and all he can resort to is putting exclamation marks at the end. And so in again, just kind of expounding on my personal interpretation of them as like an intersection, the terms of chance as like an intersection of of narrative providence, I guess, and kind of a summation of the development of modernity leading up to the mid-century. You kind of have this crisis of faith in politics that's happening right around this time. The fin de siècle is like it's a meaningful term as like a theme, not just because it's we're turning over the 8 to a 9. It's not just the Y2K thing. It is this idea of the end of the previous existence of humanity,
Hmm.
and the need for these nations, the need for these um, pre-existing forms of order in society to propagate themselves while recognizing the dissolution of the inherent believability of their right to prevailing power, I guess. And I think it's interesting that the line is, let us develop protocols to avoid it happening again, followed by absolute nonsense. And then it is said that they are grasping unreflectively at a chance to transcend the secular, as though the secular, as in a literal, in a literal sense, the origins of secular is of the times, or like of the politics of the day, kind of thing. They're simultaneously creating the secular on this ship without being able to actually transcend it. All they can do is the same thing that all the nation states on the ground below can do. They can try to shore up their legal systems. They can try to shore up the self-justifications for what they are. And I find it's a fascinating little microcosm of that turning point. And it's not even a turning point, but that kind of trending towards the infinite on the timeline of human development in politics.
Yeah, I appreciate that because I on first thought I had just assumed that it was a reference to something happening later in the book because it is certainly a foreshadowing-esque sentence.
Mhm.
But there was also part of me that did wonder what they specifically were meaning by transcending the secular because there's a lot of different ways you can read it, and I really wasn't able to make heads or tails out of it. So I appreciate that you did have something to add there, certainly.
Yeah, I think it is mostly a foreshadowing sentence, but I think it is one of those instances of self-commentary by the narrator.
Sure, which we get in a pretty explicit example of here in a minute.
Yeah.
After the next page break, we get the newest orders that they get by way of an oyster stew that is apparently made every Thursday. In this instance, they found themselves in East Java. Miles, while at a fish market on ground leave, is approached by a Japanese gentleman. It says he says he has unusual persuasiveness, and he sells him 2 buckets of what he calls Japanese special oyster. And then when Miles brings it back to the ship, he starts to cook said oysters, and suddenly a giant pearl of quote quite uncommon size and iridescence falls out of one of the oysters and indeed begins to glow from within, which the boys recognize immediately as communication from the Chums of Chance upper hierarchy. They pick the weirdest ways
I
to
mean, it's like Inspector
communicate with
Gadget.
people. Yeah, it really is. The Pinch on Wiki again goes on a really crazy tangent that I think has more to do with stuff that happens later in the book from what I can tell, but that deals a lot with like biblical theory that I don't think is relevant here. Is there any things of relevancy that either of you guys do have to add to this? Because to me, it just seems again like just a strange, comical way that the upper hierarchy is choosing to communicate with them.
Yeah, I think that's all it is. This is I don't want to try to cast aspersions on the Pinch on Wiki. I know people put a lot of work into that, but I find myself with this book kind of more often disagreeing with what's on there when it comes
Agreed.
to
Yeah.
anecdotal or opinionated stuff. These kind of side notes and these sort of internal debates that are going on in here tend to just get really off topic in a way that I'm not used to seeing with the other books that I've used the wiki for. So it's kind of a little bit disappointing. I think I'm with you. I think this is just we have to remember this is an adventure novel. And this is how those kind of things happen in those novels, you know? You're walking to the market and some dude dressed like a fish jumps out of a bush and hands you a basket of fruit that there's like a note buried underneath, and that's your next operative. So it's supposed to be this weird sort of confluence of events that leads to Lindsay biting down on a huge oversized pearl that really is a message from HQ. Like that's it. There's nothing more to that.
So okay, on first order level, I disagree, and I will get to that in a second. On the 2nd order level, I would like to refer to the section on anti-paranoia in Gravity's Rainbow. If nothing has meaning, if there is no connection between anything, we cannot do anything as humans. We have nothing to do except somehow strangle this pearl into being representation of the core document which influenced the bifurcation of the Gospels. Okay?
Yeah.
That's the only
Sorry.
option,
I'm
Cody.
sorry.
Someone who studied that shit for multiple years in college. No. No. Especially not the part of the wiki where it says the oysters are sold to Miles with, quote, unusual persuasiveness at, quote, what did seem a remarkably attractive price. This might be an inversion, a parody of the parable of the pearl where Jesus... Okay, no. No.
Yeah,
They need to get the pearls aboard the ship so they can communicate with them. That's why they're being sold at a weird price. Let's calm down, guys.
Just because I have inklings of remembrances of the stuff they get into that's later in the book that makes me want to think that there's a little bit more stock in that than you might be giving it. But I'm not going to defend that. I think it is a little bit much. I would not dive into that as relating to the Q document very much at all.
Yeah.
Again, the pearl having information encoded in it is such like a thing in Chan/Zen Buddhism, which is Zen is the Japanese version of Chan Buddhism, where more or less the idea that by meditating on the breath, by meditating on the not the breath in Zen, but in Buddhism in general, and on meditating and trying to in Zen be observant to everything equally. Ultimately, what gets found is the ultimate emptiness of any material world. And there's so much in this chapter in particular, but in the book as a whole, that has to do with the idea of an overwhelmingness of information leading to pure whiteness and or pure darkness, depending on however you want to call it. And there's so much resonance between those two ideas that I can't let that go.
Okay. That's fair.
So it could just be a coincidence on that level. But beyond that, there's also just, again, in the same spirit of like almost anarchist theory, as I got into above with the transcending the secular line. So what actually, because you elided it when you were summarizing the paragraph. They're eating, and Lindsay bites into the pearl. And
that's true. He does, yeah.
Lindsay is the one who is obsessed by virtue of being the line between using force and not using force. He is obsessed with protocol and obsessed with purity of theory and obsessed with the idea of like the figurehead should be like a dodecahedron. And just the idea that what's happening there is new information is being brought to the Chums of Chance. And the character who represents the will to order is being harmed to the extent that he abandons all of his rules and begins cursing and damning the world in the way that he would relentlessly give out demerits for if it was anyone else.
And from there, after he spits it back out, Chick Counterfly brings out of his storage locker a, quote, peculiar looking optical contraption of prisms, lenses, Nernst lamps, and adjustment screws into an appropriate receptacle of which he now carefully placed the pearl. Lindsay, still clutching his jaw in dental discomfort and muttering aggrievedly, lowered the shades in the dining salon against the tropical noontide, and the boys directed their attention to a reflective screen set on one bulkhead where presently a photographic image emerging from a solution of printed message began to appear. So at this point, we are introduced to sort of their next message, which is being projected through, essentially, like, if I understand it correctly, through the crystalline structure of the pearl itself, which leads to sort of the first mention of Iceland Spar, the way that doubles things. The message itself is basically telling them their next like destination they have to go to, and it is like there's a lot of detail in this paragraph. I guess maybe I should open up the conversation. Is there anything that we want to make sure we cover as a result of this? Because there's a whole like piece of information here about like Dr. Mikamoto, and then there's also the concept of spar in mineralogy, all before they end up having like sort of the weird apprehensive feelings they do by the end of it.
I mean, the only thing that I would really bring up, and I've been really careful throughout this season to try and keep my comments related to where we are specifically in the book and
Right.
not get too ahead. Not just for your own sake, Kate, but for anyone listening who hasn't read it. I don't want to spoil things. But I don't think it's a spoiler in any way to say that the Iceland Spar and the unique feature that it has will become a very prominent plot device as we go forward. So it's not necessarily to say that there's anything in this particular paragraph that needs to be dissected, but the mention of Iceland Spar and the sentences that come after it, the ordinary light passing through this mineral was divided into two separate rays, termed ordinary and extraordinary, a property which the Japanese scientists had then exploited to create an additional channel of optical communication wherever in the layered structure of the pearl one of the thousands of tiny, cunningly arranged crystals might occur. It's that the whole concept of how Iceland Spar, quote unquote, works is a very important thing to kind of keep in mind going forward.
Yeah, I've got three very by my standard tiny points. The first is the smallest. In case any listeners missed it, it's a hologram.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah.
That's all that's happening here. It's a hologram. It's a wonderful bit of technical writing to write it in such a mystical way. Second point, the second paragraph that is specifically about the pearls. To the fiendishly clever Oriental mind, it had been but a trivial step to combine this paramorphic encryption with the Mikimoto process. What? No. Doesn't matter how fiendishly clever or how Asian the mind is. That's not how these things work. You can't just like throw processes together. It is another really good, just a microcosm of the wonderful adventure writing, because that is the kind of like sleight of hand that those books use all the time. Where it's like, yeah, no, because you can do these two things. Why don't you do them at the same time and have something useful at the end? Which goes back to the whole chick counterfly, like time is intrinsic to any recipe. No, you can't just do these things at the same time. You can't just make a pearl that is also an encrypted message. At least not the way they're discussing. That doesn't make any sense. Third point is just that this all together is a wonderful example of scrying in tea leaves, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry to stay in the weird Orientalist space for
yeah.
metaphor there. But it's reading the bones. It is. I'm sure there are pearls out there, natural pearls that are like somewhat translucent, and if you shine the right light, you can project some kind of meaningful thing out of it. And it's just really funny to view the way that they are sure that this pearl has meaning, and they have a specialized device which I guess gives it validity, but it's just hilarious.
What they end up realizing that their next mission is to proceed, quote, by way of the Telluric interior to the North Polar regions, where they were to intercept the schooner Etienne Louis Malou in an attempt to persuade his commander, Dr. Alden Vormans, to abandon the expedition he was currently engaged upon using any means short of force, which, though not prohibited outright to the Chums of Chance, did create a strong presumption of bad taste, which every chum by ancient tradition was sworn, if not indeed at pains, to avoid. There is an additional supporting piece of the text here, in that the schooner they're headed to is named after a real person, a French officer and mathematician who worked with light and the way that light can be polarized or refract through crystals. So again, like utilizing real history to underpin the stuff that he's talking about on the page itself. We then from there go through the kind of a couple of different other people in history who have speculated that there may be a hollow Earth, and that it sort of explains that the Chums of Chance use this as a route to go from one end of the planet to the other, similar to the Panama Canal or other sort of ways in which we have created shortcuts, basically. However, when they arrive, Randolph realizes that the navigation is not as easy this particular time. They find that the entrance itself is actually noticeably smaller to get into the sort of planet's core, and that in a lot of cases the sort of birds and like earmarks of the like civilizations that were around the edges of the portal or the opening to that canyon are now gone. We've talked about this at length, so I don't think we really have anything else to add to why the entrances are different between Mason and Dixon and the stuff we've already talked here. I think we pretty much covered it, but does anyone have anything else that they want to bring up about that?
No, I think we've covered that pretty well in
Yeah.
both this episode and last episode as well. I will say on the following page on 116, I think it's interesting, especially given the idea that I'm playing with now of Miles and his magical electric brain. When he says on 116, inordinate attention from the middle latitudes, proclaimed Miles with a sort of emphatic swoon in his voice. When the interior feels itself under threat, this is a self-protective reflex. All living creatures possess it in one form or another. I can't help but wonder if the combination of his whatever's going on in his brain with the electrical signals that have been affecting him, if again, this is just my little theory that I'm playing with, if being that far up north and in an area where the electromagnetic fields of the earth are more I don't want to say concentrated, but they're more at a focal point in that general area, if that's having an impact on him as well.
That would make sense.
Yeah. No, I think that lines up to me.
Yeah, so from there, when they enter the Earth, they're sort of looking around, keeping a sight for any other aerial traffic, and then that's when they intercept a series of transmissions that at first they can't quite work out, but eventually they get closer, and then the Tesla device seems to dial into the source that it's going from, and it's here that we learn that the people calling are actually calling for help because they are under attack by a horde of hostile gnomes. And that they're signaling for someone to help. Randolph St. Cosmo says that they have to put down to render aid, and that this is an instance where the commander's discretion allows them to override the rules of the sort of Star Trek-esque rules of not intervening and also not using any sort of force. So as they cruise closer, we get a ridiculous paragraph, frankly. Does someone want to read that paragraph that says their fateful decision to land?
Before we do that, let me jump back real quick.
Yeah.
I just clocked this while we were talking about this. At the end of 116, when they're starting to get the electrical sounds that Miles throws the switch to magnify, he's the only one that can hear it. That hears clearly what's being said, because Lindsay calls it gibberish, but Miles immediately says that they're calling for help, clear as day and quite desperately too. I'm wondering if the interference in his brain has been coming from them the whole time. If he's getting signals crossed in his brain from them, and that's what's causing his kind of bizarre speech that only he seems to understand.
That could be, yeah.
I took it more to be kind of a comment on tendency of mystics being able to like direct Baratus's control, like Rasputin, with Alexandrina, like that, just that kind of phenomenon.
That could be.
I don't know, because it doesn't seem like that kind of interference would be audible anywhere else, and it seems like he's been experiencing these kinds of lapses in coherence for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Like I was actually thinking kind of the exact opposite, in that like because they passed over the pole far away from any man-made electrical interference, his natural abilities to perceive more deeply than the rest of the crew allowed him to having the Arctic or Antarctic ridge to block any of the super terrestrial signals, allowed him to hear them more clearly, I guess.
It's definitely something to look out for, as you know. This theory has developed over the course of the recording of the show.
And it's nothing more than that. This is just something I've
yeah.
been playing with. So
a day theory.
Anyway, so that paragraph, I've got it right here. Their fateful decision to land would immediately embroil them in the Byzantine politics of the region. and eventually they would find themselves creeping perilously close to outright violation of the directives relating to non-interference and height discrepancy, which might easily have brought an official hearing and perhaps even disfellowshipment from the national organization. For a detailed account of their subsequent narrow escapes from the increasingly deranged attentions of the Legion of Gnomes, the unconscionable connivings of a certain international mining cartel, the sensual wickedness pervading the royal court of Thonica, Princess of Plutonia, and the all but irresistible fascination of that subterranean monarch would come to exert, Circe-like, upon the minds of the crew of Inconvenience, Miles as we have seen in particular, readers are referred to the Chums of Chance in the bowels of the earth. For some reason, one of the less appealing of the series, letters having come in from as far away as Tunbridge Wells, England, expressing displeasure, often quite intense, with my harmless little interterrestrial shirt, though.
I love that paragraph, one for the absurdity, but also the fact that what is probably, without a doubt, the most action-packed, fascinating story he wrote is the one that people hate the most.
Yeah.
Whoever this author may
I don't know why
be.
people don't like it. I thought it was pretty damn good. It's got this. It's got this.
Just really the author insert himself be like, look, I wrote some great shit and none of you appreciated it.
This was a banger, guys. Y'all are missing out. That must have been a lot of fun to write. And I love the fact that they have a directive relating to non-interference and height discrepancy.
Yeah.
It's the most bureaucratic thing I can imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this seems to be a incredibly bureaucratic organization.
For sure.
It's also a bureaucracy run, at least as far as we can tell, by children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
What is power to a child except height?
Yeah. You can't attack anyone if they're smaller and way less than you.
That's very true. From there, they are able to escape from, quote, the ill-disposed hordes of thick-set indigenous out through the interior of the earth and then out the top of the northern portal, which they also remark is significantly diminished in its exit, even more so from the other side that they used. And we end with sort of a cliffhanger, as much as Pynchon is capable of writing one, with them on their way towards the other schooner to intercept whatever mission it is they may be involved with. And that brings us to the end of chapter 10. Chapters 9 and 10.
Part 1.
Yeah, in part 1, that's true. Chapters 9 and 10 could not be more different from one another.
Yeah.
And yeah, to the end of part 1 on a real momentous moment, Pynchon cuts that and starts over with part 2 of the novel. Do we have any funny moments we didn't go over? We covered this one pretty comprehensively, I think.
We did. I think the only thing I would add, there's 2 I have from chapter 9. The first is Foley's the meal that he orders after getting his way in with Vibe. Foley Walker's advice that day provided critical acceleration in the growth of the legendary Vibe fortune. He polished off a side of bacon and the day's output of the company henhouse up on the HQ's roof, plus a loaf of bread and 10 gallons of coffee, give or take a cup, before Bruno, expecting never to lay eyes on him again, was able to usher him into the street, puffing on one of a fistful of Scarsdale's second best Havanas. Just Jesus, what a tremendous amount of food.
That is someone who hasn't eaten in years.
Exactly. Or is taking advantage of what might be his last meal.
Also, probably.
Yeah.
Possibility.
The other one comes right after that when they're now kind of referred to as the twin vibes. Just a sentence: when they were not careering at excessive speeds up and down the avenues of Manhattan in a maroon Phaeton whose brass and nickelback work were kept rubbed to a blinding shine side by side in their pale dusters, appearing to the unwary spectators as ineluctable as any other apocalyptic riders. For those who don't know, and I didn't know until I looked it up, a Phaeton is just a sporty open carriage. So these guys are zipping around on horseback, being dragged around in a carriage, dressed like the gunslinger through early Manhattan. It's
so
beautiful.
Crazy. So that brings us to quote. Mine comes from 115, which is the description of the actual opening in the earth. Something did seem odd, however. The navigation's not as easy this time, Randolph mused, bent over the chart table in some perplexity. Noseworth, you can remember the old days. We knew for hours ahead of time. Skyfarers here had been used to seeing flocks of the regional birds spilling away in long helical curves, as if to escape being drawn into some vortex inside the planet, sensible only to themselves, as well as the withdrawal. Before the advent of the more temperate climate within, of the eternal snows to be replaced first by tundra, and grassland, trees, plantation, even at last a settlement or two, just at the rim, like border town, which in former times had been the sites of yearly markets, as dwellers in the interior came out to trade luminous fish, giant crystals with geomantic properties, unrefined ores of various useful metals, and mushrooms unknown to the fungologists of the surface world, who had once journeyed regularly hither in high expectation of discovering new species with new properties of visionary enhancement. I picked this quote not just because it's well written. I mean, basically everything in this book is well written, but because of the complete history and imagery that it imparts in only a handful of sentences, from the perspective of really selling to the reader just how much smaller the portal is, where prior they would have been able to tell for hours when they were coming up on it. Like that's a small detail that's pretty easy to like alight over if you're not thinking about it. But that concept of it has shrunk so much that it now takes hours longer for us to tell that we're coming up on it. And then it tells in, just the space of that paragraph, this kind of short story about the, not just like the signs that you would have of it, of these strange birds that are circling around it, but also the fact that, at first it was just a couple houses and maybe a couple farms, and then eventually that grew into a town itself, and then eventually that in and of itself propped up commerce. There was a marketplace that showed up, and people from the interior would come out and they would trade these crazy magical like crystals and magic mushrooms and big fish. That in and of itself tells a story that underpins the reason why the portal itself is closing, in a really clever way, and it's just excellent. I love it, and the imagery that it fills my head with in particular, I just really appreciate. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, that is great. Will, do you want to go next so I don't accidentally steal yours?
So the thing is, basically all of my candidates we did just read out throughout the coverage. And so all I have left is one that is over the length of a full page.
Oh wow. Okay.
So I mean, it's the second half of page 98 through the top third of 99. It could have been a religion for all he knew. Here was the god of current, bearing light, promising death, falsely observant. Here were scripture and commandments and liturgy, all in this priestly pictorial language whose texts he had to get his head around as they came. Study when he ought to be sleeping, by miner's candle or coal oil light, often enough by the actual incandescence from the same electrical mystery he was studying, drawing hit or miss into an understanding out of his hankering in the course of the day's work, just to see in some way, directly without equations, the way Faraday had, according to the folklore anyway, what was going on inside the circuits he was obliged to work with, which seemed fair enough. After a while, now and then, he found it was him explaining things to the collegiate hotshots. Not everything, of course, they knew everything, but maybe a detail here and there, manipulating vector symbols that stood for unseen, though easily enough and sometimes dangerously felt, electrical defense, being a chore not too different when you came to it from situating the wheel cases under the falls, getting the turbines leveled and solidly supported, tweaking the shapes of their blades, wrestling together the penstock suction pipes and wheel cases and so forth, all or most of it sweat and sore muscles, arguing with foremen, struggling up and down the terrain, finding purchases and setting up tackle, not to mention, when necessary, some bricklaying, carpentry, riveting and welding, going without sleep and being yelled at, but none of it too mysterious until one night out west of Rigo, some place, a window opened for him into the invisible, and a voice, something like a voice, whispered unto him, saying, waterfalls, electricity flows. One flow becomes another, and thence to light. So is altitude transformed, continuously to light. Words to that effect, well, maybe not words exactly. And he found himself staring into the ordinary blinding glow of a lamp filament, which she found instead unaccountably lambent, like a light through the crack of a door left open, inviting him into a friendly house, with the stream in question roaring in sovereign descent just a few feet away. It had not been a dream, nor the sort of illumination he would someday learn that Hamilton had experienced at Brougham Bridge in Ireland in 1845, but it represented a jump from one place to another with who knew what perilous aether opening between and beneath he saw it. The vectorial expressions in the book, surface integrals and potential functions and such, would henceforth figure as clumsier repetitions of the truth he now possessed in his personal interior, certain and unshakable. It is that earlier thing that Kate highlighted about Merle's understanding of photography in the previous chapter, but it is that degree of, like, maybe it's his youth, maybe it's the fact that math is, abstract enough to theoretically be described as underpinning everything, that allows him to think of it as something more real than reality, the religious aspect. But it's taking that to the next level, and it's just such a beautiful encapsulation of that kind of thing.
I hadn't even necessarily thought of connecting those two sections, but you're right. It is basically the same thing.
I'm going to go with the final scene of Maeva and Kit at the end of chapter 9. I know we read the last paragraph of this in the last episode, and I think Will mentioned the imagery of Maeva's hat, and that kind of got me thinking of how beautiful this little section is. Maeva saw Kit off at the depot, but it was a chilly parting, not too long on hope. He was pretending not to understand why nobody else had showed up, none of the men. She was wearing her church hat, church having been conducted often as not out under the sky. The old maroon velvet had picked up some years of trail dust, grown sun-faded along its many miniature ridge tops. It wasn't too long ago that he'd still been too short to look down and notice that. She fussed in and out of the depot, making sure its clock was working all right, learning what she could of the train's whereabouts from the lady telegraph operator and her assistant, asking Kit more than once if she thought he'd packed him enough food for the journey, Cornish pasties and so forth. Not like it's forever, Ma. No, of course not. Only me just being, I don't know. Might not even work out. Easy to see that happening, in fact. Just so you mind that penmanship. In school, you always wrote so neatly. I'll be writing to you, Ma, regular. You can keep an eye on them. Some stirring now along the line of town train watchers, as if they'd caught signals from the invisible distance in that joint waking dream of theirs. Or maybe, as some swore, like that they'd seen the track shift just a hair, long before the smoke over the rise or steam whistles in the distance. I'll never see you again. No, she didn't say that. But she might have. So easy. A look from him. Any small gesture of collapse from his careful young man's posture back into the boy she wanted, after all. It's a really heartbreaking scene to read. This mother letting go, of her, watching her boy go away, and knowing, like we talked about in chapter 9, about how even if he comes back, he's still not coming back the same. He's no longer that boy that she had that couldn't see the top of her hat. He's a man now, and he's on his own now. And whether or not he comes back is almost irrelevant anymore, because the Kit that comes back is not the Kit that's leaving right now. And so it's like this fundamental part of herself is leaving with him that she can never get back. It's just absolutely beautiful.
He's a special writer.
Yeah.
That brings us to listener questions and comments. Cody, do you want to take this one from Jonas?
Yeah, so we got a message from Jonas. It says, "Greetings from Finland. Wonderful podcast. Keep up the amazing work. I just started reading Against the Day for the first time and have found your discussions both illuminating and fun to listen to. In your episode on Against the Day's chapter 8, you were discussing the meaning of Vako's insult. I apologize in advance for butchering this one. I tisi nai poroja. This means literally your mother fucks reindeer in Finnish. So the translation in the book is correct. However, the correct spelling would be a little bit different. It's basically with the accent, the umlauts over the A is really the main difference that I can see here. Your aunt is a reindeer would be totisi on poro. So would be different. This is why we don't always trust Google Translate. So thank you, Eunice, for pointing that out. Really do appreciate that. and I'm glad that we're providing some helpful insight for you as you read the book, and I hope you love it as much as I do, and I hope you're enjoying it as much as we all are.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. Our next piece of correspondence comes from Vincent Timber on Reddit. They said, loving your coverage of ATD so far. I only finished it for the first time about 6 months ago, but you guys have got me itching for round 2 already. My wrists and forearms may have other ideas, though. They don't miss holding the damn thing for weeks on end. That's a big compliment to finish a 1,000-page book and then want to restart the
Dive back
1,000-page
in.
book again.
Yeah.
That is not an easy persuasive argument to make. So I'm glad that our coverage is helping you out in that regard. I don't think I've ever held this book up to read. I lay it on a counter or a table in order to read my copy of it. Do you want to read the last one, Will?
Sure. I think it was actually in the same conversation as the previous.
Might have been,
Reddit
yeah.
comment. Someone had asked about some secondary discussion of Against the Day, and Super Direction 498 said, the excellent podcast Mapping the Zone is doing a read-through of this right now. Would highly recommend checking it out. And in response, Scotty848 said, I came on to say this. I found it more difficult than Gravity's Rainbow, but with some guidance, it was doable after a few aborted attempts. Mapping the Zone is an amazing resource for pinch night. And, I think we're a podcast. We're a podcast that is, we don't take sponsorship that are, that pay us at least. And as we've established before, any donations we get go into the podcast. So we're not making money off this. We're not making a profit at least.
Not getting that water bottle money yet.
As a result,
that's not a. Are you gonna put the context for that at the end of the episode?
Absolutely not.
That's a bonus episode right there.
Okay.
Us mocking random people online. But since we're not making a profit, you'll have to excuse our vanity of reading every compliment we can find, because it sustains us.
It's the only validation we get for doing it.
That brings us to the end of this episode and also the end of part 1. As traditionally, we do wrap episodes when there's these easy divisions in his book. And I guess we kind of have somewhat of an announcement for part 1. Cody, do you want to talk about it, since you kind of made it happen, I suppose?
Yeah, so next our next episode is going to be our part 1 recap. For those of you who have been following the bonus episodes, I did one after Bleeding Edge, before Against the Day, that was about The Red Handler by Johann Harstad, a book that I just kind of grabbed on a whim while I was on a road trip, and was up in Dallas, and it turned out to be one of the best things I've read in a while. And so lo and behold, we got an email from him a little while after that episode came out, thanking us for talking about the book. And he and I sort of struck up a conversation and have been kind of back and forth through email, just talking about various things about his work. I've read one of his other books. It was also incredible. It's called Buzz Aldrin, What Happened to You and All the Confusion. That and Red Handler, and he's got a YA novel called 172 Hours on the Moon, are the only of his novels that are available in English translation. Unfortunately, it's pretty hard to get his stuff. So I would definitely recommend you find his stuff, because he is going to come on and we're going to talk about the first part of this book with him, and then we'll probably just continue having a conversation with him and just kind of see where things go, and talk to him about his work and his relationship with Pynchon's work, and what Pynchon's work is like in translation, because he mentioned he's reading Against the Day both in English and in Norwegian. So I'm really curious. I think all of us, I can speak for all of us, that we're really excited to have him on, and it's going to be a really fun chat with him. I'm still in shock that he even reached out. I just thought, I'm doing this little episode about a book that I really thought was a lot of fun and one of the better things I've read in a while. And lo and behold, the author reaches out and we got to talking. So yeah, he will be on with us for the recap on part 1, and it's going to be I think a lot of fun.
It is pretty astonishing to have gotten an email from him after that bonus episode, and
yeah,
that he was already listening to the show prior to us talking about his work.
I remember you put a message up in the Discord about it, and I woke up at like 6 o'clock in the morning or something to this message. This Johan Harstad emailed us. I was like, I'm sorry, what? And I sat there like blurrily like trying to read his email on my phone, and my wife was like, you need to like get up and brush your teeth and have coffee and then read it when you're like lucid. No, yeah, but I'm really excited to have him on. That's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, definitely. Well, as always, thank you for listening to the show. And if you like what you're doing, much like Will has said, you can donate to our show at our Ko-Fi. We are on Ko-Fi at Mapping the Zone, and all of that money does get reinvested back into the show. And we will continue to use those funds for that. We are not looking to embezzle anything. Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah, eventually we're going to get to that point, but we're still a ways off on that one.
Yeah.
And yeah, so any support you want to voluntarily throw to us, just know that we are going to use that money for good purposes. In addition to that, obviously, if you have any correspondence you want to send our way, not in the form of money, we also want to hear that too. So feel free to email us at mappingthezonepod@gmail.com. We are also on Twitter at PinchOnPod. We are also on bsky.app/profile/mappingthezone.bsky.social.
Don't forget the https://. Otherwise, they won't.
Oh yeah, sorry. Hang on a second. We're at https://bsky.app/profile/mappingthezone.bsky.social. We are also on Instagram at Mapping the Zone Podcast. Yeah, so please reach out if you have any questions, comments, concerns, thoughts, anything of any kind. Weird reviews that you'd rather not put on Apple Podcasts and just want to email to us.
You want to accuse us of being loquacious?
Yeah.
Which we are nothing if not that.
We are
liberals.
Yeah. Yep. We are literally the shortest winded people that have ever existed. And until next time, thanks for listening. Bye.
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 Yeah, it's going to have to be 2 separate episodes, guys.
You know, Cody, if you're looking for a fun activity to do in San Antonio, the water bottle company Owala, who I looked up while we were having our water bottle conversation, is having their biggest reveal ever.
Oh, goodness.
In San Antonio. Free product for the first 1,000 people, 50% off of the new product for everyone after the first 1,000 people. So,
does it say where this is going to be in San Antonio?
The thing says Pearl, San Antonio, Texas.
Jesus Christ. There's going to be 1,000 people there, and it's going to be a shit show. The Pearl is essentially like it used to be a brewery downtown that they converted into a sort of open air hipster market.
Okay.
Yeah. So there's a cool little bookstore that's nestled in there that we go to pretty often. Because they'll have authors come through and talk. And that's about it. There's everything else is overpriced. Like when the farmers markets are open there, it's people who clearly don't own a farm but are selling things that are farm to table for way more than they need to be. And
nice.
A bunch of like boutique stores. So, and it's not a very big area, and parking anywhere in San Antonio is bad enough, but in that particular area, it's a nightmare.
Well, you could be one of the first to get the newest innovation in water bottle technology.
I'll get there at 6 a.m. and be ready to go.
Yeah, we're popping the metaphorical champagne to celebrate the launch of our latest, greatest, and most freak-out worthy innovations yet. Those who attend will have the chance to get their hands on them before anyone else. We'll be giving away our new products free for the first 1,000 people in line. Can't be the first line. No worries. We'll be giving 50% off to these new Owala products for purchases made on site until 5 p.m. Central. It says the event starts at 11.
Yeah, I found it. Yeah. It's the moment we've been waiting for, Owala says.
Yeah. I'm just going to read some of their generic copy that's not about this press release, because it feels real sinister. More hydrated, more energy to do the things you love. science. Look it up. Every Awala water bottle is engineered to make it ridiculously easy to stay hydrated because we believe that a properly hydrated human is a happy human, and happy humans tend to spend more time doing what they love.
Yeah, that's weird.
I'm 100% behind not using single-use plastics as much as possible. Totally on board with that. I have a metal water bottle that I got from work that I covered in stickers so that people don't know where I work or why I have a Citibank branded travel mug. But it's a good mug or a good water bottle. I don't like everything has to be corporatized and annoyingly branded now, and it's just it's so frustrating.
The thing that I find funny, and I know that this is a podcast you have listened to as well, Cody, is the Munch Squad portions
I
of
love Munch
My
Squad.
Brother and Mother and Me. The thing that I always think of whenever Justin is reading out those press releases is like, who is actually reading these, right? Like Justin is doing it for the joke of the show within the show that he's doing, but who is reading them for real?
Yeah.
Like, who are these?
I genuinely don't know. Like, shareholders, are shareholders really going to read? And what's worse is someone writes that. So a human being spends hours of their life drafting that crap.
Drafting,
and then are proud of it, I guess.
Pickle fries from Burger King.
I really got a vibe that like it was they joked about it, but I seriously think that one of them was AI generated. One of the recent Munch Squad.
I wouldn't be surprised if it was. They've always been written in a way that feels like that.
I liked the sweet spot a couple of years ago where they were just clearly recognizing the absurdity of their job.
Yeah.
And so the CEO was just writing it and was clearly not having it edited by anyone other than like his vibes. And it was just like an endless stream of just like we're doing work here. I can't honestly say it's great work, but we're doing work and this is meaningful because I say it's meaningful, okay?
We got boots on the ground here at Wendy's, people.
It was one of those fast food brands that I got that distinct vibe from.
Well, the problem is it was fun for a while. Wendy's got really self-aware and unhinged for a while on social media, and then everybody started doing it. And the same with like Old Spice. Old Spice made some weird commercials, and now everybody has to have these non sequitur Family Guy style commercials. So it's just, something good happens, and then as is the case with the way corporate companies work, the joke just gets dragged under a car for, until no one wants to hear it anymore, and then move on to the next thing and kill that too.
Well, the difference is that I think so. The Wendy's thing was like an intern gone rogue at first.
Yeah,
it just became brand identity, and everyone's emulating that. I do think that it could not have been until the last couple of years that like Munch Squad was being like made like that joke was brought up to someone in corporate headquarters at Wendy's or whoever. So it seems much more like a natural just disinterest in their own job, which is very fun. Unfortunately, Awala is not owned by like a cult.
Oh, well, I'll give them time. They'll get bought out by one.
They have
or they'll start one.
A suspicious number of models on their website that are distinctly and like the just like cultural hairstyle stuff, distinctly Native American in appearance. It's real weird.
Really
interesting.
I've never heard of this company. It's a $30. Jesus.
Oh, that's nothing.
And some of these pictures. Oh, I know.
In the water bottle space.
Some of these pictures, like there are people engaging with these water bottles in a way that no human being engages with a water bottle. And they really only have about 3 pictures that seem to just be rotating to the point where I'm seeing the same picture twice on my screen.
Yeah. I think maybe my favorite thing that I've seen is if you go to the page for the free sip restricted, you can scroll all the way to the bottom, and they have reviews. And the second one is from today. And it is
sure
posted
is.
by someone. By someone's username is BGFTGWG 5 stars. I'm a naked mole rat in a hole. Help me is the title of the review, and the entire text is just "Vididjivigid."
Oh my god, is this the same person that's been leaving the weird reviews on our show?
Maybe.
One thumbs up, one thumbs down.
Oh my god, this is brilliant. I'm trying to see if there's any more like that because I love it. All these other ones.
It's.
I love my water bottles. Good.
What's crazy to me is that all of these are from purchases from today. You have to scroll pretty far down to go to yesterday.
I'm like, I've gone pretty far down and I'm only on yesterday still. Yeah. Oh, there's the 12.
This has to be dead internet shit. Because what are they giving rebates for reviews?
I don't know. That's the thing. Is like I don't know who fills these out
reviews anymore.
Like I've never been so blown away by a product that I've purchased that I need to go and like leave a review of it because people have to know how much I loved it.
It's something.
Rebecca B bought this on 11/12, gave it 5 stars, loved it. I bought this one for my husband, and he's extremely happy with it. He also gave me one. Will purchase again. Why? You already have a water bottle.
You're done. Game over.
Why does anyone ever review anything on the company website? Oh, this is hilarious. Actually, I just clocked the top of the reviews list, the stars stuff. Look at the numbers.
They're all 5.
There are just as many 1-star reviews as there are 4-star reviews, and there are just as many 3 and 2-star reviews as either 4 or 1.
I wonder if I can filter.
Yeah, you
can. I can filter. Yeah.
I never trust the 1 stars either.
No,
wow, someone wrote a really long 2-star review. They did a whole pros and cons.
The bottle literally rusted inside within 2 months. As a longtime reusable water bottle owner, I have never experienced this with any other water bottle brand in my life. Customer service suggested I use bartender's keep to remove rust instead of offering me a replacement bottle. Wow. I was shocked when they said they could not guarantee the product wouldn't rust, especially after only 2 months. Really disappointing.
Well, what I have to say is that the elements that make stainless steel like meaningfully stainless are basically at odds with it being able to hold a vacuum. So it's not necessarily a failure on the side of the production. It is a failure in customer service.
Yeah.
I might have just found the best review.
Did you?
I think I did. This is a 2-star review from Lao S on January 3rd. It's titled First Time Trying Owala. So I heard about Owala's innovative free sip technology. I don't know what that means. And I was interested in purchasing. Due to the price, I waited to find an Owala I truly liked, which was surprisingly hard because I'm not a fan of the mismatched colors. I then decided on the ghost-themed Owala and set my calendar only to have the cup sell out within the time I was at work. I thankfully was able to order it as long as I didn't mind waiting till late November for the cup to be shipped, which was disappointing. I find the color drop concept distasteful and predatory to customers. Anyways, one I got the cup, it was a unique experience. The pros are, I can keep the same lid for using the straw or chugging, which is not a luxury I have had with my other water bottles. The carry loop was also a nice touch. It is glow in the dark, which helps when I want to get water at night. The cons. The cap has a rubber finish that constantly gets smudges. The bottle does not fit in a cup holder. Parentheses, no, I could not order a smaller one to fit because the one I liked only came in one size. The bottle I have has ghosts on it, and while yes, they do glow in the dark, they chipped away within only a week of use. Parentheses, no, I did not drop the bottle, and no, I did not put the bottle in the dishwasher. I do have to hand wash the bottle, which is something my other bottle does not require. I do give it some points for the ease of disassembly. a couple of kids saw it and were excited. So I let them try to open the lid, and I was surprised they struggled due to the button being hard to press. I cannot confidently recommend this bottle to my friends due to my experience with their ordering and delivery, as well as the experience using the bottle. And then they put a picture of it up, and it's wet on the outside because they got the water in the wrong place.
What I want to know is why that's a 2-star review. What?
Yeah, that
what
seems
is
like a
it?
1.
Yeah,
That's why I love it so much.
This is
The
like
cons clearly outweigh the pros.
relevant link in chat, by the way.
Oh,
obsessive
God.
compulsive disorder.
This is like actually this should be in the DSM next to the list of symptoms of obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That's what that looks like, is somebody who reviews all these things and says these damning things about the product and the company and the customer service and the quality of their experience with the product, and then says, yeah, but I can't justify a 1-star. It holds water.
It does its basic function. Everything outside of there has to go.
There's
1-star.
Yeah.
That's too
Yeah,
far.
the car drives, but it's made of knives. What am I supposed to do with it?
Sure, I have to reset the mirrors every time I get in the car. Sure, the airbag went off without a collision. But it drives. It's only stalled out every third time I've tried to start it.
I give my Ford Pinto 2-star.
there's someone named Jessica M who is a verified purchaser from January 1st of this year who gave it 1 star. Title of the review is My Order. And then the text of the review is a chuck out of a chuck out of the water bottle is gone. I got for my daughter and I haven't showed her yet because I need to do what and don't want to wait. I
It's
don't
honestly
know.
sad.
Uh,
What is this person's life that the only source of control they seem to feel is in leaving a review? Because there's no other reason you would write that review. It doesn't mean anything to anyone else. It has no value for the customer service or to say, oh, this is not a good product. It's just like, this shitty thing happened and I'm very sad about it. Please help.
Oh man.
I do like the most recent 1-star review. Just recent.
what? Okay. This is the. I have to stop after this. There's one from January 8th titled, and I have to read this exactly as it is written on the review. Nothing, plus sign, special, plus sign, about, plus sign,
that
this,
one.
plus sign, bottle, plus sign. It takes more effort to make the plus sign than it does to put a space in there.
There's someone on there's someone in PGC on 12/28 of last year who formatted there's like a poem after each statement that they started a new line in their review. Poor design, broken quickly. The loo panel is a poor design, broken quickly after purchase. Plastic does not hold up. When broken, the cap becomes worthless.
It's
Move over
actually
leaves of
poetry.
grass. This guy's got you. Oh my god.
We never received the water bottle from the warehouse treasures. It has been almost a month.
I like the 3-star reviews because you got people who are actually leaving real 3-star reviews. Discolored bottle, but otherwise works great.
Yeah.
And you got another person who ordered 5 and didn't get a discount.
Cool.
And they're mad about it.
What do you want?
They're trying to bully people on their bespoke review service. where the only people they're influencing are the people they're trying to influence through bad word of mouth. Is I think this is what was meant with the whole Times Magazine Me Generation thing from the 60s. That person.
Mm-hmm. I think I found my new favorite one. It's a 1-star review from someone literally named Karen on December 17th of last year. And the title is all lowercase, and it says, "This freaking sucks." And then the text review is entirely in uppercase, and it says, "Sorry for my foul language in the title, but this store is draining me. I cannot find the water bottle I have been looking for the last 2.5 hours. My 3-year-old will literally run away if I can't purchase your water bottle. I need a manager, and maybe you will get a customer back. Up to you. The ball is in your court, buddy. My toddler's throwing a temper tantrum and almost knocked over the tree. Thanks a lot."
My God.
Oh. Okay. I do just have to point out what I found because I can't unsee this. If you scroll down past the reviews, past the FAQs, there is a thing under the hashtag Awala that says "a thirst of its kind." This is either the most unintentionally or the most viscerally intentionally horny ad for a water bottle I've ever seen in my life. It just says "a thirst of its kind." Mark your calendars. Something big is coming on 1/25/25, and has a very close up shot of a condensated water bottle with water dripping down in a very suggestive manner.
I think you need to go to that event in San Antonio on the 25th.
I think I might need to.
And get us all Owala
Listen,
bottles.
I've been reading some reviews of your product. I happen to be kind of a big deal in the podcast community, so
Do you want to sponsor our show?
sponsor wrapping this up. We really need some hydration while we ramble on for 4 hours about a fucking book.
Is it bad to admit to myself that I kind of want to fuck this water bottle?
Are you looking at the thing?
No, I'm just imagining the impetus for writing that ad. I'm just trying to imagine the person who wrote it.
It's like a xenomorph. It's just dripping unnecessarily, and it's off-putting.
Well, there was like a specific ad that was very, very well distributed. In like in the 90s.
You talking about the Adidas ad with the shoe?
No, it was literally, it was for like, it was like a perfume ad or some shit. And it was literally just a very close-up picture of what was very likely like a thigh. That it was literally that picture, but with a thigh instead of a water bottle. And it was just like, it was so close cropped that it couldn't be viewed as like obscene by anybody, and so they just got away with placing it everywhere.
Oh, sure.
It feels like they're trying to riff off of that in a way that makes no sense.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Oh, man.
Well, should we get back to
Probably.
So I have one gem from the 3-star reviews.
Oh yes, please.
Lovely.
Laura. Title, not so good.
Oh,
I had
boy.
this bottle for 1 week and it felt from my daughter, and it immediately broke in half. It literally broke in a half. I am so unsatisfied with the free sip I got. I hope Heels can take this message and be better with costumers.
How does it break perfectly in half? Like, along which axis? That's
It immediately broke in half. Literally broke in a half. I am so unsatisfied with the free sip I got.
that your kid didn't drop it. Someone threw that on the ground with malice aforethought.
Someone sawed it in half as a personal attack.
So many people in the 3-star reviews are literally just saying like, I dropped this metal water bottle and it landed lid first and the lid cracked. This is a
Uh-huh.
design flaw. No, I'm sorry. Things break in the world. This is not
Yep.
like, you know, this what are these people thinking? What
I don't know.
why are any of these people reviewing these things? This is like the most real, like, I've been thinking a lot about realness in the context of this book,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm thinking not reality like the, you know, the like now like introduced into like academic gender theory, like the queer trans realness idea.
Sure.
And I'm just thinking this is realness of reviews. This website. It could be completely artificial intelligence generated.
Mm-hmm.
It could be 20,000 insane people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, truly insane.
It's an amazing place. I'm so glad that we found it.
Yeah, it's quite the corner of the internet. Whew.
Thanks for the direction, Kate.
You're welcome. Happy to help whenever I can.